The howling wind of a cruel December night swallowed Penelope Elliott's desperate sobs as she stumbled through the deepening snow, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other gripping a tattered shawl that provided little protection against the biting cold. The year was 1878, and Bentonville, Arkansas had never seen such a merciless winter storm. "Please," she whispered, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared instantly into the darkness. "Just a little further." But Penelope had no destination, no sanctuary awaiting her. She had been cast out abandoned by the man who had promised to love her forever, who had planted the seed now growing heavy in her womb, and who had fled at the first sign of consequence. Her fingers were numb, her lips blue, and the contractions that had begun hours ago were growing stronger, more insistent. Each step became more difficult than the last as the snow reached her knees. The faint glow of a distant lantern pierced through the curtain of white, a small farmhouse standing resolute against the storm. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice was lost to the wind. Penelope took another step forward and felt her legs give way beneath her. She collapsed into the snow, the cold seeping through her threadbare dress, reaching toward her very core. She curled around her unborn child, a final, desperate act of protection. Clayton Quinn had just finished securing his horses in the barn when he heard a sound so faint he nearly missed it beneath the roaring of the wind. He lifted his lantern higher, peering into the swirling darkness. "Hello," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the yard. "Is someone there?" The storm answered with another howl, but Clayton's instincts told him something wasn't right. He trudged through the snow, following nothing but a feeling. Then, the lantern's glow caught something dark against the white ground, a huddled form half buried in the fresh powder. "Good Lord," he gasped, rushing forward. A woman lay there, trembling violently, her arms wrapped protectively around a belly swollen with child. Her skin was deathly pale, her lips tinged with blue. Without hesitation, Clayton set down the lantern and scooped the woman into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been for someone in her condition, making his heart ache at the thought of what hardships she must have endured. "I've got you now," he murmured as her head lolled against his shoulder. "You're safe." The woman's eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. "My baby," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your baby will be fine," Clayton assured her, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. "Just hold on." He carried her through the storm to his modest farmhouse, kicking the door open with his boot. The warmth of the crackling fire in the hearth enveloped them as he gently laid her on the worn sofa closest to the flames. "What's your name?" he asked, quickly retrieving blankets from the chest nearby. "Penelope," she managed through chattering teeth. "Penelope Elliott." "I'm Clayton Quinn," he replied, tucking the blankets around her. "You're on my farm about 3 miles outside of Bentonville." He knelt beside her, his weathered face etched with concern. "What in heaven's name were you doing out in this storm?" A pained expression crossed Penelope's face, followed by a grimace as her body tensed. "The baby," she gasped, clutching at her belly. "The baby is coming." Clayton's eyes widened. He was a rancher, accustomed to delivering foals and calves, but a human baby was entirely different. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, already moving toward the door. "No," Penelope cried out, her hand shooting out to grasp his arm with surprising strength. "There's no time, and you'll never make it back in this storm." Her eyes locked with his, filled with both fear and determination. "Please don't leave me alone." Clayton swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "All right, Miss Elliott, I won't leave you." He rolled up his sleeves, his mind racing through everything he knew about birthing. "I'm going to help you, but you need to tell me what to do." For the next several hours, Clayton worked alongside Penelope through her labor. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and held her hand through contractions that seemed to tear her apart. Her screams echoed through the small house, but her courage never faltered. Just before dawn, as the storm outside began to subside, a new cry filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. "It's a boy," Clayton announced, his voice thick with emotion as he carefully wrapped the tiny red-faced infant in a clean blanket. "A perfect little boy." Tears streamed down Penelope's exhausted face as Clayton placed her son in her arms. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching a finger to his tiny fist, which immediately curled around it. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Clayton with eyes full of gratitude. "You saved us both." Clayton felt something shift inside him as he watched mother and child together, a protective instinct he'd never experienced before. "You rest now," he said gently. "You're safe here for as long as you need." As Penelope drifted into an exhausted sleep, her son nestled securely in her arms, Clayton sat in the chair beside them, keeping watch. The storm had brought this woman to his doorstep, this brave, beautiful woman and her newborn son. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew his quiet, solitary life had just changed forever. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and cautious care. Clayton had fashioned a makeshift cradle from a drawer and soft blankets, placed close enough to the fire to keep the baby warm but not too close to be dangerous. Penelope was weak but recovering, and Clayton found himself in awe of her strength. "You should name him," Clayton suggested on the third morning as he brought her a cup of hot tea. The snow outside had begun to melt, revealing patches of the winter-brown earth beneath. Penelope looked up from her nursing child, surprise evident on her face. "I've been thinking about that," she admitted. "I'd like to call him Samuel after my father." "Samuel," Clayton repeated, testing the name. "That's a good, strong name." A comfortable silence settled between them as Penelope continued to nurse little Samuel. Clayton busied himself stoking the fire, trying not to stare at the intimate scene. "You must be wondering about me," Penelope finally said, her voice soft but steady. "About why I was wandering in a blizzard while heavy with child." Clayton straightened, turning to face her. "I won't deny I'm curious, but you don't owe me any explanations." "I think I do," she said, shifting Samuel to her shoulder to gently pat his back. "After all you've done for us." She took a deep breath, her eyes focusing on the dancing flames in the hearth. "I was engaged to be married to a man named William Davies, a banker's son from Little Rock. When I told him I was with child, he promised we would marry right away." A bitter smile crossed her lips. "The next day I discovered he had fled town, leaving me with nothing but a note saying he wasn't ready for the responsibility." Clayton's jaw tightened, anger flaring at the cowardice of this unknown man. "My parents." Penelope continued, her voice catching slightly. "They're good people, but deeply religious and concerned with appearances. They gave me a choice: give up my baby to an orphanage once it was born or leave their home." She met Clayton's gaze, her eyes clear and unapologetic. "I chose my child. So you left," Clayton supplied when she paused. Penelope nodded. "I had some money saved. Not much, but enough to get me started somewhere new. I was heading to Bentonville where no one knew me. I thought I could find work, maybe as a seamstress." She looked down at Samuel, now sleeping peacefully. "The storm caught me by surprise. It came on so suddenly, and then the pain started. I thought we would die out there." Clayton moved to sit in the chair beside her. "But you didn't. You're both here, safe and sound. Because of you," Penelope said, reaching out to touch his hand. Her fingers were warm now, no longer the frozen digits they'd been when he found her. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's no debt between us," Clayton assured her. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with certainty. Not anyone would have taken in a stranger, delivered her baby, and cared for them both without question or judgment. Clayton felt heat rise to his face under her direct gaze. At 32, he had long since given up on the notion of having a family of his own. After returning from fighting in the war, he had settled on this modest farm, content with his solitude and the occasional company of the townsfolk when he ventured into Bentonville for supplies. But having Penelope and Samuel in his home had awakened something inside him, a longing he had buried deep. "You and Samuel are welcome here for as long as you need," he said firmly. "At least until you're strong enough to travel, should you still wish to go to town." Penelope's smile was like the first ray of sunshine after a long storm. "Thank you, Clayton." As the days turned into weeks, a rhythm developed in the small farmhouse. Clayton would rise before dawn to tend to his animals and the daily chores, then return to find Penelope up with Samuel, often with breakfast waiting. She insisted on contributing, using what little strength she had regained to keep the house in order and prepare meals from Clayton's modest stores. Clayton found himself lingering at the table longer each morning, savoring the simple pleasure of sharing breakfast with someone, of conversation that wasn't just with his horses or the occasional traveling salesman. Penelope was well-read and intelligent, with opinions on everything from politics to literature, and a sharp wit that often caught him by surprise. In the evenings, after the day's work was done and Samuel was settled, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes they talked. Other times, they sat in comfortable silence, Clayton whittling wood into small figures while Penelope mended his clothes or worked on fashioning new garments for Samuel from old shirts Clayton had provided. It was during one such evening, as January gave way to February, that Clayton realized he was falling in love with Penelope Elliott. The realization struck him with such force that he nearly sliced his finger with his whittling knife. "Are you all right?" Penelope asked, looking up from her sewing. Clayton nodded, unable to trust his voice. How could he have let this happen? She would leave, eventually go to town, build a life for herself and Samuel, one that didn't include a scarred, solitary rancher with little to offer but a weathered heart. "Clayton." Penelope pressed, setting aside her work. "You've gone pale." "Just thinking," he managed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The snow's nearly gone. The road to town should be passable soon." Something flickered across Penelope's face, disappointment, concern. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it will be." An awkward silence fell between them, the first since Penelope had arrived. Clayton stood abruptly, mumbling about needing to check on the horses, and fled to the barn where he could breathe again. The cold air of the February night cleared his head somewhat. Clayton leaned against the stall of his favorite mare, Duchess, who nickered softly and nudged his shoulder. "I'm a fool, Duchess," he murmured, stroking her nose. "Falling for a woman who never asked to be here, who has her whole life ahead of her." Duchess snorted, as if in disagreement, and Clayton couldn't help but smile. "You're right, girl. I should at least enjoy the time we have left before she goes." When he returned to the house, Penelope was already in bed, the small room that had been his, but which he had insisted she take while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Samuel's makeshift cradle had been moved beside her. Clayton stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them sleep, his heart heavy with the knowledge that soon this house would be empty again. The next morning, Clayton announced at breakfast that he needed to go into town for supplies. "The food's running low, and I need feed for the animals," he explained, avoiding Penelope's eyes. "I can ask around about work for you while I'm there, if you'd like." Penelope was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently trailing over Samuel's soft head as he nursed. "Is that what you want?" she finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. Clayton looked up, confused. What I want? For me to find work in town to leave, she clarified, her green eyes searching his face. I want. Clayton began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. I want what's best for you and Samuel. You deserve a proper life, not stuck out here with you, Penelope interrupted, a hint of fire in her tone. Is that what you think, Clayton? That being here with you is somehow less than what we deserve? Clayton stared at her, taken aback by her directness. You came to Bentonville to start a new life, Penelope, not to be tied to a ranch miles from town with a man you barely know. I know you better than you think, she countered, shifting Samuel to her shoulder. I know you rise before dawn every day, no matter the weather. I know you whistle the same tune when your content's some old war song, I imagine. I know you're kind and patient, and that you talk to your horses like they're people. She took a deep breath. And I know that when you look at Samuel, there's love in your eyes, just as there is when you look at me when you think I won't notice. Clayton felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Penelope, he said hoarsely. If you want us to leave, Clayton, we will, she continued, her voice softening. But don't make that decision for us. Ask me what I want. He swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. What do you want, Penelope? Her eyes never left his as she answered without hesitation. I want to stay. The world seemed to stop for a moment as Clayton absorbed her words. Stay here with me. Yes, she said simply, if you'll have us. Clayton crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside her chair. I want nothing more, he admitted, daring to take her free hand in his. But are you sure? This life isn't easy, and I'm sure, Penelope interrupted, squeezing his hand. These past weeks have been the most peaceful of my life, despite everything. You've shown me kindness without expectation, respect without condition. That's rare, Clayton. That's something worth holding on to. Clayton's eyes burned with unshed tears. I never thought I'd have a family, he confessed. After the war, I came back different, quieter. The town girls weren't interested in a man who preferred the company of horses to people. Their loss, Penelope said with a small smile. I happen to find your quiet strength rather appealing. Clayton laughed, a sound of pure joy that startled Samuel, who let out a tiny hiccup. Penelope adjusted him, cooing softly until he settled again. I still need to go into town, Clayton said after a moment, but not to find you work. We need supplies and… He hesitated, suddenly nervous. There's something I'd like to buy while I'm there, if you're agreeable. Penelope tilted her head, curiosity brightening her eyes. What might that be? Clayton took a deep breath. A ring, he said simply. Nothing fancy, but proper all the same. The smile that bloomed on Penelope's face was answer enough, but she spoke anyway, her voice thick with emotion. I'm very agreeable to that, Clayton Quinn. Clayton rode into Bentonville with a lightness in his heart he hadn't felt in years. The town was bustling despite the lingering patches of snow, with wagons and horses crowding the main street. He tied Duchess to a hitching post outside the general store and headed inside, nodding greetings to familiar faces. Well, look who finally came down from the mountain, called Martin Fuller, the store owner, a rotund man with a perpetually cheerful disposition. Was beginning to think the snow had buried you, Quinn. Clayton smiled, removing his hat as he approached the counter. Nearly did, Martin. Need to stock up on just about everything. While Martin began gathering his usual supplies, Clayton cleared his throat. Also looking for something special today. A ring. A lady's ring. Martin paused, a sack of flour in his hands, his bushy eyebrows shooting up in surprise. A ring, you say? Well now, that is news. Don't carry much in the way of jewelry here, but Widow Peterson has some nice pieces she sells on commission. Her place is just down the street. Clayton nodded his thanks, completed his purchases, and headed to the small shop Martin had indicated. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun looked up from behind a glass display case. "Mr. Quinn," she greeted him with evident surprise. "What brings you to my humble establishment?" Clayton shifted uncomfortably. "I'm looking for a ring, Mrs. Peterson, an engagement ring." The widow's face lit up with delight. "Well, this is unexpected. And who is the fortunate lady?" "Her name is Penelope Elliott," Clayton replied, a smile tugging at his lips just saying her name. Mrs. Peterson's brow furrowed slightly. "Elliott? I don't believe I know the family." "She's new to the area," Clayton explained vaguely, not wanting to share Penelope's personal circumstances. "She's staying at my farm for now." Understanding dawned in the widow's eyes, followed by a hint of scandal that she quickly masked with professionalism. "I see. Well, let me show you what I have." She unlocked the case and removed a small velvet tray containing several rings. They were modest compared to what might be found in a big city jeweler's, but to Clayton they were perfect. "This one," he said, pointing to a simple gold band with a small pearl set between two tiny diamonds. "How much, Mrs.?" Peterson named a price that made Clayton wince inwardly, but he nodded without hesitation. This was for Penelope, for their future. He counted out the money, watching as the widow wrapped the ring carefully in a small box. "Congratulations, Mr. Quinn," she said as she handed him the package. "May you and your bride have many happy years together." "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson," Clayton replied, tucking the box safely into his pocket. As he loaded his supplies onto Duchess, Clayton couldn't help but notice the curious glances and whispers from townsfolk. News traveled fast in Bentonville, and by tomorrow, everyone would know Clayton Quinn had bought an engagement ring. Let them talk, he thought. Nothing could diminish his happiness today. He was about to mount Duchess when a voice called his name. Turning, he saw Sheriff Thomas approaching, his weathered face serious beneath his hat. "Quinn," the sheriff greeted him with a nod. "Heard you've got a woman staying out at your place. That true?" Clayton stiffened slightly. "It is. Miss Elliott and her son have been my guests since the big storm." "Her son?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Interesting. Where's the father? Not in the picture," Clayton replied tersely. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" Thomas shrugged. "Just doing my duty, keeping track of new folks in the area. This Miss Elliott, she in some kind of trouble?" "No," Clayton said firmly. "She's an upstanding woman who fell on hard times. And soon," he added, his hand unconsciously moving to the pocket containing the ring, "she'll be my wife." The sheriff's expression changed to one of surprise, then something that might have been respect. "Well now, that changes things. Congratulations, Quinn. It's about time you settled down." Clayton nodded his thanks, eager to end the conversation and return to the farm to Penelope and Samuel. The ride home seemed twice as long as the journey into town, despite Duchess's steady pace. As the farmhouse came into view, Clayton felt a surge of emotion. Just weeks ago, it had been merely a place to sleep and shelter from the elements. Now, with Penelope and Samuel inside, it was becoming a home. He unloaded the supplies, setting aside a special package of tea and a small bag of hard candies he had splurged on for Penelope. As he approached the house, he heard her singing softly a lullaby he didn't recognize, but found instantly soothing. Clayton paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of Penelope rocking Samuel by the fire. She looked up, her face brightening at the sight of him. "You're back," she said, her voice warm with welcome. "We missed you." "I missed you too," he replied, suddenly feeling shy despite the understanding they had reached that morning. "Both of you." He set down his packages and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair as he had done before leaving. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box. "I meant what I said this morning," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you and Samuel to stay, not just as guests, but as family." He opened the box, revealing the pearl and diamond ring. "Penelope Elliott, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Penelope's eyes as she gazed at the ring, then at Clayton's earnest face. "Yes," she whispered, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, Clayton Quinn, I will marry you." With trembling fingers, Clayton slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Samuel stirred in Penelope's arms, making a soft cooing sound that caused them both to laugh. "I think he approves," Penelope said, looking down at her son. Clayton reached out to touch the baby's soft cheek. "I hope so, because I plan to be the best father I can be to him." Penelope's free hand came up to touch Clayton's face, her expression serious. "You already are." He turned his face to kiss her palm, then leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. Their lips met in a gentle, tentative kiss that deepened as Penelope responded with unexpected fervor. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted softly. "Neither did I," Penelope replied. "Not after everything, but maybe that's how it works. Love finds you when you least expect it, often when you need it most." Clayton nodded, overwhelmed by the rightness of it all, this woman, this child, this moment. "When should we marry?" he asked. "Soon," Penelope answered without hesitation. "I don't want to wait. Next Sunday." Clayton suggested. "We can ask Reverend Collins to perform the ceremony after service." Penelope's eyes widened. "That's barely a week away. Too soon." "No," she said, her expression softening. "It's perfect, but what will people think?" A woman with a newborn, no husband in sight, suddenly marrying a man she barely knows. Clayton's jaw set in determination. "Let them think what they will. We know the truth, and if anyone dares say a word against you or Samuel, they'll answer to me." Penelope laughed, the sound like music to Clayton's ears. "My protective cowboy," she teased gently. "Always," he promised, and sealed it with another kiss. The following Sunday dawned clear and crisp, a perfect late February day. Clayton had ridden into town the previous day to speak with Reverend Collins, who had agreed to perform the ceremony after the regular service, though not without raising an eyebrow at the haste and circumstances. Penelope wore her best dress, the one she had been wearing when Clayton found her, now carefully cleaned and mended. She had fashioned a simple bouquet from dried flowers and evergreen sprigs found around the farm. Samuel, now almost 2 months old, was wrapped in a new blanket Clayton had purchased in town, his alert eyes taking in everything around him. They arrived at the small white church just as the regular service was ending. Clayton helped Penelope down from the wagon, conscious of the curious stares from the congregation as they filed out of the building. Reverend Collins met them at the door, his expression kind but reserved. "Mr. Quinn, Miss Elliott, are you ready to proceed with the ceremony?" "We are," Clayton confirmed, his hand steady on Penelope's lower back. "Thank you for agreeing to this, Reverend." The minister nodded, leading them inside. The church was empty save for a few curious parishioners who had lingered, including Widow Peterson and Sheriff Thomas. "Would anyone like to stand as witnesses?" Reverend Collins asked, looking around the sparse gathering. "I'll stand for Quinn," the sheriff offered unexpectedly, stepping forward. "And I for the bride," Widow Peterson added, moving to Penelope's side with a warm smile. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Clayton spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. When it was Penelope's turn, her voice trembled slightly, but her words were firm and sure. Samuel remained remarkably quiet throughout, as if sensing the importance of the moment. By the power vested in me, Reverend Collins concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Quinn. Clayton leaned in, placing a gentle, reverent kiss on Penelope's lips. When they turned to face the small gathering, he was surprised to see genuine smiles on the faces of their witnesses. Congratulations, Mrs. Quinn, Widow Peterson said, stepping forward to embrace Penelope. May I? She asked, gesturing to Samuel. Penelope nodded, carefully transferring her son to the older woman's experienced arms. This is Samuel, she said proudly. A fine boy, the widow declared after a moment of inspection. He has your eyes, dear. Thank you, Penelope replied simply, exchanging a private glance with Clayton. They had agreed that Samuel would be raised as Clayton's son, with no mention of his true parentage unless Samuel asked when he was older. Sheriff Thomas approached, extending his hand to Clayton. Congratulations, Quinn. You've got yourself a fine family. I know it, Clayton replied, shaking the offered hand. Thank you for standing with me today. As they prepared to leave the church, Reverend Collins presented them with a certificate of marriage. It's official now, he said with a small smile. God bless your union and your family. The ride back to the farm, their home now, truly was filled with a contented silence, broken only by Samuel's occasional coos and the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. Mrs. Quinn, Clayton said as they approached the farmhouse, testing the name on his tongue. Penelope Quinn, it suits you. Penelope leaned against his shoulder, Samuel secure in her arms. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. Clayton helped his wife, down from the wagon, then gathered Samuel in his arms while Penelope straightened her dress. Welcome home, he said, offering his free arm to her. Together, they crossed the threshold into their new life as a family. Spring arrived in earnest by mid-March, transforming the landscape around the Quinn farm. The bare trees burst into leaf, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the days grew longer and warmer. With the change in season came changes to the farmhouse as well. Clayton had set about making improvements almost immediately after the wedding. He added a proper crib for Samuel, fashioned from oak with his own hands. He expanded the vegetable garden, built a chicken coop, and began plans for adding another room to the small house. Penelope thrived in her role as wife and mother. Her natural efficiency and intelligence made her an excellent partner in running the farm. She learned quickly, eager to contribute beyond the traditional housekeeping duties. Clayton found her one morning in the barn, confidently milking one of their 2 cows, Samuel sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. You're full of surprises, Mrs. Quinn, he said, leaning against the doorframe with an admiring smile. Penelope looked up, a strand of golden hair falling across her forehead. Figured it was time I learned. You can't do everything yourself, and I want to pull my weight around here. Clayton crossed to her, bending to place a kiss on the top of her head. You already do more than your share, but I appreciate the help. Their marriage had quickly grown into a partnership based on mutual respect and deepening affection. The physical aspect had developed naturally, with both showing patience and consideration. Their first night together as husband and wife had been somewhat awkward, Penelope still recovering from childbirth and Clayton nervous about hurting her, but as the weeks passed, they discovered a passion that surprised them both. By April, they had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel was growing rapidly, his personality emerging more each day. He had Clayton's serious expression when concentrating and Penelope's quick smile. Though not his biological son, Clayton found himself searching for resemblances anyway, as if love alone could create physical connections. One warm afternoon, as Clayton worked on the new room addition and Penelope hung laundry to dry in the spring breeze, A wagon appeared on the road leading to their farm. Clayton set down his tools, shading his eyes against the sun to make out their unexpected visitors. "It's Sheriff Thomas," he called to Penelope, "and someone else I don't recognize." Penelope froze, one of Clayton's shirts half pinned to the line. "What could they want?" Clayton shrugged, wiping his hands on his trousers as he went to meet the approaching wagon. "Afternoon, Sheriff," he greeted, trying to keep his tone casual despite the unease building in his chest. "Quinn," the sheriff nodded, then gestured to his companion, a well-dressed man with a notebook tucked under one arm. "This here is Mr. James Elliott from Little Rock. Says he's looking for his daughter. Thought you might be able to help." Clayton felt the blood drain from his face. Elliott, Penelope's father. He turned to look back at his wife, who had gone completely still, her face as white as the sheet in her hands. "Mr. Quinn," the gentleman said, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for a man his age. "I understand my daughter Penelope may be in your acquaintance." Before Clayton could respond, Penelope stepped forward, Samuel now in her arms. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice steady despite the slight trembling of her lower lip. Mr. Elliott stared at his daughter, then at the infant in her arms, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his lined face. "Penelope," he breathed, "thank God you're alive." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group until Sheriff Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, seems like my part in this is done. I'll leave you folks to your reunion." He tipped his hat to Penelope. "Mrs. Quinn, good to see you and the little one doing well." As the sheriff turned his wagon around and headed back toward town, Clayton moved to stand beside his wife, his arm going protectively around her shoulders. "You're married," Mr. Elliott observed, his eyes falling to the simple ring on Penelope's finger, then moving to Clayton's supportive stance beside her. "Yes, Father," Penelope confirmed. "This is my husband, Clayton Quinn. And this," she added, looking down at Samuel, "is your grandson, Samuel." Mr. Elliott removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "May we speak inside?" he asked, his voice softer now. "It's been a long journey." Clayton and Penelope exchanged a glance, communicating silently in the way they had quickly learned to do. Clayton nodded slightly, and Penelope turned back to her father. "Of course," she said. "Please, come inside." The farmhouse kitchen seemed smaller with Mr. Elliott's presence. He sat stiffly at the table while Penelope prepared coffee, Samuel now sleeping in his crib. Clayton remained standing, leaning against the counter, unwilling to leave his wife alone with the man who had cast her out months ago. "Your mother is worried sick," Mr. Elliott began once Penelope had served the coffee and taken a seat across from him. "When you didn't write, when we heard nothing. You gave me no reason to believe you wanted to hear from me," Penelope replied, her tone even but cool. "You made your position quite clear the night you told me to leave." Mr. Elliott flinched, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "I was wrong," he said after a long pause, the words seemingly difficult for him to voice. "We both were your mother and I. We were thinking of appearances, of what the neighbors would say. We forgot what was truly important." He looked up, meeting his daughter's gaze directly. "Family." Penelope's composure wavered slightly. "It's a bit late for that realization, isn't it, Father?" "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "But when we received word that William Davies had been killed in a gambling dispute in Texas, I knew I had to find you, to make things right if possible." Clayton straightened at this news. "Davies is dead," Mr. Elliott nodded. "Shot over a card game in Dallas, according to the telegram. He left outstanding debts and a tarnished reputation behind him." He turned back to Penelope. "I was a fool to ever think him worthy of you, my dear." Penelope was silent for a moment, absorbing this information. Clayton watched her carefully, ready to intervene if the conversation became too distressing. "I'm sorry for your pain, Father," Penelope finally said, "but I can't say I mourn William. He abandoned me when I needed him most, and in doing so, he gave me the freedom to find true happiness." She reached out, her hand finding Clayton's. "I have a good life here, a loving husband and a beautiful son. I wouldn't change anything, not even the hardships that brought me here." Mr. Elliott's eyes moved between Penelope and Clayton, something like understanding dawning in his expression. "I can see that," he said softly. "You look content, more so than I've seen you in years." "I am," Penelope confirmed. "Very much so." "And you, Mr. Quinn," Mr. Elliott said, addressing Clayton directly for the first time. "You've taken on another man's child as your own." Clayton met the older man's gaze steadily. "Samuel is my son in every way that matters. I was there when he came into this world, and I'll be there for every day of his life that I'm granted." Something in Mr. Elliott's expression softened. "That takes a special kind of man," he acknowledged. "Penelope's mother and I. We would very much like to be part of your lives if you'll allow it, to know our grandson, to make amends." Penelope looked to Clayton, uncertainty in her eyes. This was her decision to make, but he wanted her to know he would support whatever she chose. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. "I won't pretend the past didn't happen," Penelope said, turning back to her father. "You hurt me deeply when you chose social standing over your own daughter." "I know," Mr. Elliott said, his voice thick with regret. "But," Penelope continued, "I don't want Samuel to grow up without knowing his grandparents. You and Mother are welcome to visit, to be part of our lives as long as you respect our family and our home." Relief washed over Mr. Elliott's face. "Thank you, Penelope. That's more than I dared hope for." "Where are you staying, Mr. Elliott?" Clayton asked, practical concerns taking precedence now that the emotional barriers had begun to lower. "At the hotel in Bentonville," he replied. "I wasn't sure what reception I would receive, so I made arrangements to stay a few days." Clayton nodded. "You're welcome to stay here if you prefer. We're adding a room to the house, but it's not finished yet. Still, we could make up a comfortable bed in the sitting room." Surprise registered on Mr. Elliott's face, followed by genuine gratitude. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose. Perhaps I could come back tomorrow, spend some time getting to know my grandson." "We'd like that," Penelope said, her voice softer now. "And perhaps you could write to Mother, let her know we're all well." "I'll do that tonight," Mr. Elliott promised, standing to take his leave. "Thank you both for hearing me out." Clayton walked the older man to his rented horse and buggy, leaving Penelope to check on Samuel. "Mr. Quinn," Elliott said as he prepared to depart, "I want you to know that I recognize the good fortune my daughter has found in you. When I forced her from our home, I never imagined she would find such a worthy man to care for her and her child." "I'm the fortunate one, sir," Clayton replied honestly. "Penelope and Samuel have brought joy into my life I never thought possible." Elliott nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Take care of them." "With my last breath," Clayton promised. When he returned to the house, he found Penelope sitting in the rocking chair, Samuel awake and gurgling in her lap. She looked up at Clayton's approach, her eyes questioning. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside the chair. "I think so," she said, considering. "I never expected to see him again, let alone have him ask for forgiveness." "People can change," Clayton observed. "Seems like losing you made him reconsider his priorities." Penelope reached out to touch his cheek. "I'm glad you encouraged me to hear him out. Samuel deserves to know his grandparents, and perhaps this is a chance for real healing." Clayton turned his face to kiss her palm, just as he had done the day he proposed. "You have a generous heart, Penelope Quinn. It's one of the many reasons I love you." "And I love you," she replied, leaning forward to kiss him properly. for everything you are and everything you've given us." Samuel made an impatient noise, causing them both to laugh. "And this little man loves you too," Penelope added, lifting Samuel so Clayton could take him. Clayton cradled his son against his chest, marveling at the perfect weight of him, the trust in his tiny face. "Well then," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I'd say I'm the richest man in Arkansas." Summer arrived with blazing heat and golden fields. The Quinn farm prospered under the combined efforts of Clayton and Penelope. The new room had been completed in May, just in time for a visit from Penelope's mother, Clayton Elliott, who had arrived with trunks of gifts for Samuel and tearful apologies for her daughter. The reconciliation had been tentative at first, but as the days passed, the wounds began to heal. Catherine proved to be a doting grandmother, and James Elliott had shown genuine interest in Clayton's farming operations, even offering financial advice that had helped them expand their livestock. By late August, as Samuel approached his 8th month, the farm had been transformed. A fresh coat of whitewash brightened the house, window boxes overflowed with flowers Penelope had planted, and the barn had been expanded to accommodate their growing herd. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm, punctuated by visits from the Elliots and occasional trips into Bentonville for supplies and social gatherings. The townsfolk had long since accepted Penelope as Clayton's wife, any initial gossip fading in the face of their obvious devotion to each other and their son. On a particularly hot afternoon, Clayton returned from the fields to find Penelope sitting on the porch, fanning herself while Samuel napped in his cradle beside her. She looked up as he approached, a secretive smile playing at her lips. "You look like the cat that got into the cream," Clayton observed, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "What are you plotting, Mrs. Quinn?" Penelope's smile widened. "I was thinking about how quickly life can change. Just last winter I was alone and frightened, wandering in a blizzard with no hope for the future, and now—" She gestured to their home, to Samuel, to Clayton himself. "And now," Clayton prompted, sitting beside her on the porch step. "Now I have everything I could ever want," she said softly. "A beautiful home, a wonderful husband, a healthy son." She paused, her hand moving to rest on her stomach. "And soon another child to love." Clayton froze, his heart skipping a beat as her words registered. "Penelope," he whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was telling him. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town for medicine for Samuel's teething. We're having a baby, Clayton. Your baby." The distinction was subtle but meaningful. Though Clayton considered Samuel his own in every way that mattered, this child would carry his blood, a physical manifestation of their love. Joy burst through him like a summer storm, sudden and overwhelming. He pulled Penelope into his arms, mindful of her condition even in his excitement. "A baby," he repeated, wonderment in his voice. "Our baby." Penelope laughed, the sound as bright and clear as the Arkansas sky above them. "Due in early February, the doctor thinks, almost exactly a year after Samuel was born." Clayton placed his hand over hers where it rested on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for this gift, for everything." "It's I who should be thanking you," Penelope replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "For finding me in that storm, for saving us both." Clayton thought back to that frigid December night, how close he had come to missing her altogether. If he had gone to the barn just minutes earlier or later, if he hadn't heard that faint sound beneath the howling wind, if he had dismissed it as his imagination. The thought made him tighten his embrace. "It was fate," he said simply. "We were meant to find each other." Penelope nodded against his shoulder. "I believe that too." Samuel stirred in his cradle, making the small gurgling sounds that signaled he was waking from his nap. Clayton released Penelope and moved to lift his son, who greeted him with a toothless grin and a grab for his mustache. "What do you think of that, young man?" Clayton asked, bouncing Samuel gently. "You're going to be a big brother." Samuel responded with a happy babble, causing both parents to laugh. "I think he approves," Penelope said, reaching out to stroke her son's downy head. As the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, Clayton was struck by the perfect contentment of the moment. He had everything he had never dared to dream of: a loving wife, a son he adored, another child on the way, and a prosperous farm to leave as their legacy. "I love you, Penelope Quinn," he said, the words simple but weighted with all the emotion he felt. "And I love you, Clayton Quinn," she replied, her green eyes reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." The months passed with the changing seasons, autumn's golden splendor giving way to winter's stark beauty. Samuel celebrated his first birthday with a small gathering that included the Elliots, Sheriff Thomas and his wife, and a few neighbors who had become friends. As Penelope's pregnancy progressed, Clayton found himself increasingly protective, insisting on handling the more strenuous farm chores despite her protests that she was perfectly capable. The memory of finding her in the snow, alone and in labor, haunted him still. This time would be different. She would be warm, safe, surrounded by loved ones when their child came into the world. January brought milder weather than the previous year, for which Clayton was immensely grateful. Still, he stockpiled firewood, kept the pantry full, and made arrangements with Dr. Miller to be available at a moment's notice as Penelope's time drew near. "You're fussing like a mother hen," Penelope teased one evening as she sat by the fire, her hands moving skillfully as she knitted a tiny blanket. Her belly was round and full beneath her dress, the baby active within. Clayton, in the middle of checking the windows for drafts for the third time that week, gave her a sheepish smile. "Can't help it. Want everything to be perfect this time." Penelope set aside her knitting and held out her hand to him. "Come here," she said softly. Clayton crossed to her, taking her offered hand and kneeling beside her chair. "Feel this," she said, placing his palm against the side of her belly. After a moment, he felt it, a strong, deliberate kick against his hand. "That's our child, Clayton, strong and healthy just like Samuel was." "Everything will be fine," Clayton nodded, though the worry didn't entirely leave his eyes. "I know, but I can't help remembering how close I came to losing you both before I even knew you." Penelope's expression softened. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs gently tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes, lines that hadn't been there a year ago. "But you didn't lose us. You found us. And now we're here, safe and warm, waiting for this new life to join our family." Clayton turned his face to kiss her palm, the gesture that had become their own private symbol of affection. "You're right, as usual," he conceded with a small smile. "Still, I'll feel better once the baby's here and you're both well." "Not long now," Penelope assured him, wincing slightly as the baby delivered another forceful kick. "Dr. Miller says any day." Those words proved prophetic. 2 nights later, Clayton awoke to Penelope's hand on his shoulder, her voice steady but urgent as she informed him that her waters had broken. Unlike Samuel's precipitous birth during a blizzard, this labor progressed in the comfort of their own home, with time to send for Dr. Miller and Catherine Elliott, who had been staying in Bentonville in anticipation of the birth. The doctor arrived promptly, having made good on his promise to be available when needed. Catherine took charge of Samuel, keeping the curious toddler occupied in the front room while Clayton remained steadfastly at Penelope's side. You don't have to stay, Penelope told him between contractions, though her grip on his hand suggested otherwise. Most men wait outside. I'm not most men, Clayton replied simply. I'm your husband, and I'm staying right here unless you truly want me to go. The relief in her eyes told him all he needed to know. He stayed, supporting her through each wave of pain, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement as the hours passed. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Miller finally announced, "I can see the head. One more good push, Mrs. Quinn." Penelope gathered her remaining strength, squeezing Clayton's hand so hard he feared his fingers might break. Then, with a final, tremendous effort, she brought their child into the world. "It's a girl," Dr. Miller announced as the baby's indignant wail filled the room. "A perfect little girl." Tears streamed down Clayton's face as the doctor placed their daughter on Penelope's chest. She was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair that could only have come from him. "Hello, little one," Penelope whispered, her exhaustion forgotten in the wonder of meeting their daughter. "We've been waiting for you." Clayton couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the love that flooded through him. He touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, marveling when her miniature fingers curled around it with surprising strength. "She's beautiful," he finally managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Just like her mother." Penelope looked up at him, her face radiant despite the exhaustion of labor. "What shall we call her?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to meet their child first. Now, looking at her perfect face, Clayton knew. "Hope," he suggested. "Because that's what she is, a symbol of everything good that can come from the darkest times." "Hope Quinn," Penelope tried the name, smiling as the baby seemed to respond to the sound. "It's perfect. Hope Catherine Quinn, if you agree, after my mother," Clayton nodded, too moved to speak. He bent to kiss Penelope's forehead, then their daughter's. "I'll get Samuel," he said once he had composed himself. He should meet his sister. Catherine had done an admirable job keeping Samuel entertained, though the toddler had sensed something important was happening. When Clayton appeared, Samuel immediately lifted his arms, his expression serious. "Mama," he asked, one of the few words he had mastered. "Mama is fine," Clayton assured him, lifting him into his arms. "And so is your baby sister. Would you like to meet her?" Samuel nodded solemnly, and Clayton carried him into the bedroom where Penelope was now resting comfortably, the baby swaddled in her arms. Catherine followed discreetly, her eyes shining with happy tears. "Samuel," Penelope said softly as they approached, "this is your sister, Hope." Clayton sat carefully on the edge of the bed, positioning Samuel so he could see the baby. The toddler stared at the tiny bundle with intense curiosity. "Baby," he said clearly, reaching out one small hand. "That's right," Clayton confirmed, guiding Samuel's hand to gently touch Hope's cheek. "Your baby sister." Samuel looked from Hope to his mother, then to Clayton, his young face serious as he processed this new development. Then, to everyone's delight, he leaned forward and placed a sloppy kiss on Hope's forehead. "Well," Catherine said from the doorway, wiping away a tear, "it seems the young man approves of his sister." Penelope laughed softly, the sound filled with pure joy. "He's going to be a wonderful big brother." As Clayton gazed at his family, Penelope, Samuel, and now little Hope, he felt a completeness he had never imagined possible before that fateful winter night. "What are you thinking?" Penelope asked, noticing his expression. Clayton smiled, lifting Samuel onto his lap as he leaned closer to his wife and newborn daughter. "I was thinking about beginnings," he said. "How the worst day of your life became the best day of mine. How finding you shivering in the snow changed everything." "For both of us," Penelope added softly. Clayton nodded, his heart full to bursting. "For all of us." The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew into a thoughtful, responsible boy with his mother's intelligence and a compassion that made Clayton prouder than words could express. Hope, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes, developed a spirited independence and a love for the land that matched Clayton's own. Two more children joined the Quinn family: James, born 3 years after Hope, and Emma, who arrived 2 years later. The farmhouse expanded along with their family, with Clayton adding rooms and modern conveniences as their prosperity grew. Penelope established a small school on their property, teaching not only their own children but those from neighboring farms who would otherwise have had to travel too far for an education. Her natural gift for teaching flourished, and she found fulfillment in shaping young minds just as she did in nurturing her family. The Elliots became regular visitors, the past hurts healing more with each passing year. James Elliott provided financial guidance that helped Clayton expand their operations to include more cattle and eventually a small apple orchard. When the elder Elliots decided to retire from Little Rock, they built a modest house on the edge of the Quinn property, close enough for frequent visits, but allowing both families their independence. On a golden autumn afternoon, 15 years after that fateful winter storm, Clayton stood on the porch of their home, watching as Penelope conducted an impromptu science lesson in the yard. Samuel, now 16 and nearly as tall as Clayton, was helping his younger siblings conduct an experiment with falling leaves, his patient explanations showing the same teaching gift his mother possessed. "Penny for your thoughts," Penelope said, joining Clayton on the porch after the lesson concluded. At 35, she was more beautiful than ever in Clayton's eyes, the passing years only adding depth to her beauty. "Just counting my blessings," Clayton replied, slipping his arm around her waist. "And thinking how different life might have been if I hadn't heard that faint cry in the storm all those years ago." Penelope leaned into him, her head resting comfortably against his shoulder, a perfect fit, as it had always been. "I've thought about that too," she admitted. "How close we came to never finding each other." "But we did find each other," Clayton said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And look what we've built together." Their children had moved on to a game of tag, their laughter ringing across the yard. The farm stretched out beyond them, the fields golden with harvest, the apple trees heavy with fruit. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of the elder Elliott's cottage, and the town of Bentonville was just visible on the horizon. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible," Penelope said softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is our life." Clayton turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. After 15 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart beat faster. The touch of her hand still sent warmth through his entire being. "I love you, Penelope Quinn," he said, the words no less heartfelt for having been said thousands of times over the years. "More today than yesterday, and not as much as tomorrow." Penelope's smile was as radiant as it had been the day he proposed. "And I love you, Clayton Quinn, for finding me in the storm, for carrying me inside, for building this beautiful life with me." As they sealed their words with a kiss, their children's laughter providing the perfect background music, Clayton knew with absolute certainty that no man had ever been more blessed. From the darkest winter night had come the brightest future, a future filled with love, family, and a joy that grew with each passing day. And it had all begun with a woman heavy with child, left in the cold, and the cowboy who had found her shaking and carried her inside.